At 2:30 p.m. local time in the Caribbean Sea, two Venezuelan F-16 fighting falcons roared in low, cutting across the sky just a few hundred feet above the waves. Their target wasn't a smuggler's boat or a training range, it was the USS Jason Dunham, a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke destroyer bristling with sensors and missiles. On radar, the blips appeared fast, closing the distance. The bridge of the American warship knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't an innocent flyby, it was a deliberate provocation, a game of chicken, except this one involved supersonic jets and billion-dollar hardware. The Pentagon later called the move reckless. This wasn't even the first time. Just the day before, Venezuelan jets had pulled the same move, streaking dangerously close to US ships. And this time, the stakes were even higher. Behind the scenes, Venezuela's leadership wanted to send a signal. Only days earlier, a US strike had disabled a speedboat tied to a powerful cartel. In Caracas, that action was seen as a challenge to sovereignty. The flyovers were meant to project strength, to show that Venezuela couldn't be intimidated. But in making that choice, those pilots were about to discover a hard truth. Intimidation works both ways. The two F-16s roared in hot, banking so low that the shockwaves rippled across the water's surface. From the outside, it looked like a bold show of power, but in reality, the closer they flew, the more they gave away. On the bridge of the Jason Dunham, no one panicked. The crew knew the routine: stay steady, follow protocol, and let the ship's defenses do their job. This wasn't about matching noise with noise. It was about discipline, patience, and control. From the bridge, the first move was calm and measured. A voice crackled over the open radio channel. Unidentified aircraft. You are approaching a United States warship operating in international waters. Maintain safe distance. No raised tone, no panic, just the steady delivery of standard procedure. The message was clear: step back. But instead of replying, one of the Venezuelan pilots hit his afterburner, streaking past the destroyer's bow in a blazing flash of orange. It was a show of defiance. Yet deep inside the ship, the real contest was already underway. Deep inside the Combat Information Center, the fight wasn't about roaring engines or flashy flybys, it was about data. The ship's powerful AN/SPY-1 radar, the heart of the Aegis combat system, had already locked onto the jets long before anyone on deck could see them. On the glowing screens, numbers poured in: altitude, speed, bearing. Weapons crews stood ready, their systems armed. SM-2 surface-to-air missiles waited inside the launch cells. Sea Sparrows stood by for mid-range defense. And if all else failed, the Phalanx Gatling gun could light up the sky in seconds. One wrong move from those jets and a destroyer had the power to shut them down instantly. But launching weapons wasn't the goal. The captain stood steady, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the tactical display. His orders were simple but firm. Do not escalate unless there's a direct threat. The USS Jason Dunham was operating legally in international waters with every right to be there. The true risk wasn't the jets themselves, but the danger of one miscalculation, one sudden move that could spiral into a full-blown international incident. Quick question here: if you were in the captain's chair at that moment, would you have held steady like he did or fired off a warning shot? Drop your answer in the comments below and stick around until the end of the video to see why that decision matters more than you think. From the deck, sailors tilted their heads skyward as the second F-16 thundered overhead, skimming so low its shadow briefly swept across the destroyer's missile hatches. To anyone watching, it might have looked like Venezuela had claimed the upper hand. But in truth, the opposite was happening. Every flick of the jet's radar, every burst of comms back to their base, every move they made, it was all being captured and recorded by the Jason Dunham's advanced electronic warfare systems. What looked like intimidation was actually a gift. So why was a US destroyer even here, so close to Venezuelan waters? The answer went back just a few days. On September 2nd, American aircraft had tracked and destroyed a fast-moving boat in the Caribbean, which US officials linked to a powerful cartel. Washington called it a success in the fight against narcotics, But in Caracas, it was seen very differently. Leadership there condemned it as a violation of sovereignty and vowed to answer. That answer came not in words, but in the roar of those F-16s screaming low across the sea. Ironically, those same F-16s had once been supplied by the United States back in the 1980s, when Venezuela bought dozens of them as cutting-edge fighters. But decades had passed, spare parts were scarce, the avionics were dated, and keeping them flying was a constant challenge. Still, under Venezuela's leadership, they had become symbols, fast, loud, and dramatic, a show of defiance, even if they were no longer truly modern. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side, Cold War-era jets straining to look menacing. On the other, a destroyer tied into satellites, drones, and even a full carrier strike group nearby one of the most advanced naval networks on Earth. From a distance, the F-16s might have looked like they held the upper hand, but in reality, the closer they flew, the more they exposed themselves. Every move the Venezuelan jets made was being logged in detail. When their fire patrol radars locked onto the destroyer, it gave away precise waveforms analysts could catalog. Every radio call back to base revealed frequencies, timing, even how secure their comms really were. And then there was the heat. By diving low and lighting afterburners, the fighters left huge thermal trails in the humid Caribbean air, perfectly captured by the ship's infrared sensors. For the Navy, it was like collecting fingerprints at a crime scene. What Caracas hoped would look like a show of power had turned into the opposite. In the electronic battle space, every burst of flame, every radar sweep, every flare wasn't intimidation, it was information. To the Venezuelan command back on land, the footage might have looked like a victory lap, but to US analysts watching from Norfolk or Pearl Harbor, it was a stream of vulnerabilities being handed over on a silver platter. By the time the F-16s finally broke off and banked away, the Jason Dunham's crew hadn't flinched. They didn't need to. The Venezuelan pilots believed they were rattling America's cage, but in truth, they'd already made their biggest mistake, confusing noise for strength. Instead of intimidation, they delivered something far more valuable, a complete set of data on how their air force actually performs under pressure. Back on the ground, Venezuelan leaders could frame the footage however they wanted. Jets roaring past a US destroyer, bold and unshaken. To their audience, it might have looked like a win. But for US analysts, the picture was very different. What they saw was a collection of weaknesses, vulnerabilities, neatly recorded, and a clearer view of how Venezuela's aging air fleet actually operates. By the time the F-16s turned back toward home, the Jason Dunham hadn't changed course, hadn't fired a missile, and hadn't shown a single sign of panic. The sailors simply logged the event as another entry in the ship's record. But for the intelligence teams streaming that data, it was a gold mine. Venezuela had tried to intimidate, but in the end, it only revealed more than it ever intended. In Washington, there was no laughter at the theatrics. The Pentagon's response was swift, calling the flyovers reckless and provocative. The message was clear. This kind of close pass wasn't just a stunt, it was a serious risk. One mistake in the sky could have tipped the region into a dangerous escalation, and the US wanted to make sure Caracas understood that. President Donald Trump made the warning unmistakable. Any Venezuelan aircraft that endangered US ships would be taken down. And this wasn't just talk. Within days, 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters were flown into Puerto Rico, just a short hop from Venezuelan airspace. These weren't aging jets from decades past. They were America's most advanced fighters, built to slip through radars and dismantle defenses before the enemy even knows they're there. The arrival of those F-35s was a clear signal. If Venezuela wanted to raise the stakes, the US was ready to play on an entirely different level. And the Jason Dunham wasn't out there alone. Behind her stood the weight of a full US Navy task force, destroyers, cruisers, supply ships, even amphibious assault vessels carrying Marines. Overhead, P-8 patrol planes scanned the seas while drones kept watch from above. What looked like a lone ship on the horizon was in reality part of a shield stretching across the entire Caribbean. For Venezuela, that imbalance was impossible to ignore. Their F-16s could buzz a destroyer, make noise, maybe even rattle nerves for a moment, but they couldn't change the bigger picture. Their Air Force lacked modern missiles, lacked stealth, and lacked the logistics to sustain a serious fight. Against the layered reach of the US Navy, the gap wasn't just wide, it was overwhelming. And that's what made the situation so dangerous. A single wrong move, a missile lock, a misheard radio call, a pilot reacting too quickly could have turned a noisy flyby into a live battle in seconds. Both the destroyer's crew and the Venezuelan pilots had to feel it. The razor's edge of a game of chicken, where one side, refusing to swerve, could spark something far bigger than either intended. In the end, Venezuela had tried to shake the cage, but ended up shaking itself. The bigger lesson was clear. In modern conflict, it's the calm side that usually comes out on top. Flybys, flares, and chest-thumping displays don't change the balance of power. What matters is training, discipline, and the ability to turn an opponent's noise into knowledge. And on that score, the US Navy walked away with the advantage without even breaking a sweat. But here's the real question. Imagine standing on the bridge of that destroyer as two supersonic fighters dived low across your bow. Before you go, tell us, if you were standing on that deck, watching those F-16s scream overhead, would you have stayed calm or ordered a warning shot? I want to hear your answer down below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to subscribe and share. It helps bring more real maritime stories straight to you.